Michael Hart wins the best joke for the first of the year so far this year. I got one from him this morning that said, I would like to return my trial subscription to 2026 after 3 days. So maybe that's what we're doing, whatever. So would you, as a courtesy to other people, check and make sure that your device is in the stun position? All right. So we don't have Corbin here today. He's off somewhere, so John Watson and Tim Leatherwood are responsible for all of this. And for those of you who are watching online, and I'm glad that you could join us. No matter who you are or where you are on your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. So for those of you who are here for the first time, I hope you come back. And just to acquaint you, we always begin this time in a period of silence. Being silent is the most important, basic spiritual practice you can do. There's no technique involved. Just sit down and shut up. And try to be present and aware. So if it helps to close your eyes, we can do that. This silence expresses our intention to be aware that we live inside the heart of sacred mystery, and that sacred mystery seeks to become alive in who we are and the way that we live. So may grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be at our end and at our departing. And may we have the eyes to see and the courage to walk the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. May we be open to growing, and may all creation benefit from what we do here today. Amen. Some of you may remember that 3 or 4 years ago, we moved from our residence of almost 40 years to high-rise near here. And in that process, I took time off to move, which is a piece of cake. We still have boxes. And during that time, we had a great list of speakers who came and spoke to us. And one of those speakers was Michael Taylor. And Michael Taylor is going to be here next week to speak. I've been able to get him. He's an in-demand speaker, and he has written this book. And I think you might find the subtitle of it interesting. It's about how he found God and spirituality without church, religion, or the pew. So for those of you who are interested in this kind of thing, he's a very interesting, dynamic speaker, and I hope you come and hear him. You know, there is no spiritual tradition that I know of anywhere, ever, in the history of humans that doesn't involve light. Light is either referred to or spoken of in some way in all religions. Now, each of us has a life, and hopefully the life that we live is long and useful. And the life that we live unrolls itself one day at a time. to where we have our life. This is your life. And we go along in life, and it doesn't take long before something happens and we experience a break. Maybe we're not chosen on a side in school. Maybe we had a girlfriend or a boyfriend who left us. But as time passes, we experience more breaks. You remember that time you said something you wish you could take back and can't? Or the time somebody said something to you that you wish had never been said? Sometimes these breaks are small, and sometimes they're quite significant. The death of a parent, the development of an addiction, the loss of a partner, a serious diagnosis. And these things begin to make up the pattern of our lives. These breaks become ourselves. We wish they didn't happen, but they do. And we have to live with them. We have to somehow make sense of them. We have to take them into ourselves. And we begin to think that maybe these breaks are what constitute our lives. And eventually, we learn that we have to live with these things. And we have to somehow find a way to put them into and make them fit into our lives so that we can make them belong. Everybody gets broken. But if we follow the way of patience and tolerance and love, we begin to learn that these breaks don't define us, but rather they make up who we are. It isn't that breaks don't occur. It is that breaks don't define us. That's the magic of ordinary life. And that, in essence, is what this class is about today. And if Jeff will give me a raise, I'll do magic every Sunday. So if you will mention that to him, that would be helpful. I don't know if this is legal or not. The fire alarm goes off. A true story. I had a friend who's a professional magician who years ago did a breakout group in a room, and he did a routine that involved burning something in a small room. And it was, they had a lot of people from Japan who were there, guys who were dressed in really nice suits. And he did this effect, and the sprinkler system went off. There is no recovery from that. So I'm calling this time today somewhere between gravity and grace. And that's a phrase that I got from a very long, beautiful article in Harper's Magazine that was written by Christian Wyman. And I thank you, Christian Alfonso, for sending that to me. I would never have found it otherwise. I think I like Wyman's prose better than his poetry, but all of it is stunning. And I mention this title because today we're going to try to tackle the most radical teaching Jesus ever gave. Now, the word radical doesn't mean far-fetched or ridiculous or out there. The word radical means at the root of. It means to be firmly planted in the ground and thereby fundamental to existence. So one of my hopes going forward is that we can encounter the person of Jesus and his teachings in that order. This is also one of my fears, because it's so much easier to deal with humanly created beliefs about Jesus rather than to embrace him as a teacher who has relevancy for our lives right now and right here. And that's one of the reasons we'll be getting into this today, why there are some people who find it so much easier to argue about things like the virgin birth, the literal nature of the Bible, the factual nature of miracles, the literal nature of the resurrection, all that stuff, rather than to love other people. So when we were last together, it seems a year ago, I shared with you my initial encounter with Father Richard Rohr. I encountered Father Richard, I'm going to say 1983. And there were many things that initially impressed me almost literally about this man and his teachings on my brain. And one of the first things I remember Richard Rohr saying is that Jesus was the first non-dual teacher in the West. Now that further confirmed for me what a philosophy of religion professor had said to me in graduate school, and that is that if I really wanted to know the teachings of Jesus, I ought to explore Hinduism and Buddhism. And I did that. And I've also been exploring some other things. One of the many things about the water in which we swim in the West, and we are not aware of the water in which we swim, is that we believe that our way of thinking, particularly when it comes to religion, is the best, if not the only way to experience and express the sacred. And my contention is that it isn't. But it's the way to which we are addicted. And addictions, by their very nature, are things we can't see. So they're always hidden and they're disguised as something else. And we cannot heal what we do not acknowledge. Now, there are several things that I want this class today to explore about Richard Rohr's assertion about Jesus being a non-dual teacher. Because without understanding these things, and I'm not talking about understanding them intellectually, but with our hearts, we are not going to understand the teachings of Jesus. I frequently think of the work of Corita Kent, who was a nun back in the 60s. Most of you were not alive then. Some of you were not. But Corita Kent was this hippie nun who did these etchings, whatever you call them. This is one of them, which I love. You can't see it clearly, but it'll be on the website when these slides go out. She says in this etching, to understand is to stand under, which is to look up, which is a pretty good way to understand. Isn't that beautiful? She had a whole series of these things, and you can look them up. As a matter of fact, I think there is a documentary about Corita Kent. A risk for any spiritual teacher, regardless of tradition, is that the teacher stands the risk of creating the illusion that learning information is the same thing as knowing something. And it isn't. So this begins to get us into one of the things in Rohr's assertion about the matter of non-duality. There is information to learn, but if we stop at the information level, we will not have actually learned anything. Or to put it that another way that applies uniquely to this time and place, we remain at the level of religion, not spirituality, if we just stay at the information level. So if you leave here today thinking that you understand something about God or reality or whatever the topic is at the moment, and we're going to get into a prolonged study of prayer in a few weeks, if you leave with thinking that you got something, you're going to miss what I'm hoping to teach because there's nothing to get, and if you get that, then you've got it. Right? That's non-dual. I'm trying to teach a way that you can't teach. You can't put it in any concept or words. So maybe I show the limitation of words. So the territory that we're about to enter this year or for the next several weeks is so massive that it's difficult to know where to start. But I'm going to start here. I'm going to ask you, how many of you are familiar with this saying? The Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not exist at all. If you've ever heard that, would you hold your hand up? There are a few of you, okay? Which shows you haven't been paying attention. Because I've used this phrase countless of times in teaching in here. The first time I used it was 10 years ago. And my records, I've got this thing on my computer that will allow me to do word searches of things I've written. And I have used this phrase 30 times in this class. The Christian of the future will be a mystic, or that Christian will not exist at all. Got it? Now here's the thing about this quote. This was written in 1996. That was 30 years ago. We are in that future. Where are the mystics? This is what's wrong with Christianity at the moment. We don't got many. One of the Substacks that I faithfully read is one written by Heather Cox Richardson. Since the takeover of our government by the Orange Jesus and his thugs, I have, in effect, stayed away from media, except for a few people that I read on Substack. And one of them is Heather Cox Richardson. She's a highly regarded historian. And there have been a few other people that I mentioned in here over the past. I want to read to you a rather extended passage from Richardson. Over the Christmas holiday, the Trump administration threw its weight against the U.S. Constitution in favor of Christian nationalism and authoritarianism. The framers of the Constitution established the United States of America on the rule of law, rejecting any religious qualifications for office or any religious legal doctrine. They recognized that the establishment of one religion over others attacked a fundamental right, an inalienable right of conscience. And if lawmakers could destroy the right of freedom of conscience, they could destroy all other unalienable rights. Those in charge of government could throw representative government out the window and make themselves tyrants. This is still quoting her. In the First Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1791 as one of the 10 amendments that make up the Bill of Rights, the new Americans agreed that, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. To that, sometimes under pressure, the nation is held. It is central to what it means to be an American. And yet, on December 25, 2025, a religious holiday for many Christians, the Trump administration attacked that American principle to claim that the United States is a Christian nation. That's the end of her quote. But she went on in that article to cite at least 6 different declarations that came from our government on Christmas Day that declared the United States to be a Christian nation. Well, that doesn't strike close to home, does it? And then in the Houston Chronicle, the Sunday after Christmas, there was a front page story about how the pastor of a megachurch in the Woodlands said he was paying no attention to the separation of church and state, but rather was taking his quite conservative teaching into woke regions. They may show up here next week. So, in the beginning, Trump claimed to know nothing of Project 2025. In October, he firmly embraced it by name, and the primary goal of Project 2025 is to move the United States toward a traditionalist Christian society. Now, if you wonder how this is possible, the answer is quite simple. We are governed by a leadership that was elected by people who function at a very dualistic level. And the primary concerns of people at the dualistic level are security, safety, and defense. So, Richard Rohr describes this as level 1 on his schema of development, where our living is all concerned about my body, my self-image, and it not only applies to individuals, it applies to groups. I still miss our dog fiercely. And if we did not live in a 14-floor level place, I'd still have one. I just hate to see Sherry have to get up in the middle of the night and walk the dog out. Our dog's name was Jet, and I got him as a puppy. And I remember the day that he moved from puppyhood into young doghood. We were standing in the dining room of our home, visiting with some people, and Jet was there, the object of conversation, frisky little guy. And we had a floor-to-ceiling window in the dining room that looked out on the street. And somebody walked down the sidewalk. And Jet surprised himself and us by going, "Woo!" It's what dogs do. That's their instinct. They protect their territory. There's even a breed called border collies. And this mentality is a mentality that says, if you do something that threatens my identity, I will blow you out of the water. If you were to go see a spiritual director, which, by the way, is what you're doing, one of the first things would happen is some exploration of where you are developmentally. Now, this is usually done through some gentle conversational process. What are you looking for? Why now in your life did you come here? What's happened? Tell me a little bit about your background, that sort of thing. There's a framework that the director is working from, or should be. Now, over the years that I've been teaching this class, I have given you many developmental theories. I'm going to give you another. I'm going to do it really quickly. And this is the model Richard Rohr uses. And I want to be real clear. These are my words, but this is his model. And I also want to be clear, this is not unique to Rohr. It's built on the work of a lot of other people. The very first assignment that I had in training in clinical psychology was to read Erik Erikson's developmental stages. We needed to know how people should progress from one level of growth to another. So this is level 1. I am my body. Level 2 is my external behavior is who I am. And here we focus on how we look. We hide everything about ourselves from other people and eventually from ourselves. And what goes underground, we usually project out. You find out what ticks you off about other people, you will learn something about yourself. Anglos take their dark side and project it on the black people. That's what we do at level 2. Level 3 is my thoughts and feelings are who I am. And this is where liberals get trapped. I referred to it earlier. Our education is the thing. If people only saw things like I do, then everything would be okay. Now, conservatives can do that too, but, you know. Now, people at this level and at levels 1 and 2 do not see how self-serving their beliefs are. And then there's level 4, and this is a major breakthrough. My feelings are who I am. Now, to get here is really important, but it's no substitute for an encounter with the sacred. So level 5 is the really tough one, and it is my shadow is who I am. And the best term I know for this in the Christian tradition is the dark night of the soul. So here is where we don't know about, but we incorporate the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. I'm the nature to grow old, get sick and die, and lose everything. I'm not exempt from this. This is true for me. Not here, here. Now, I want you to trust me when I say you can't read a book about what I've just said. You can't hear a lecture about what I've just said. Because one of the shortcomings of American culture is this do-it-by-yourself mentality. That's nonsense. In order to know yourself, you must be known by another. This is the genius of recovery programs. In order to be known by another, you must know yourself. And this solitary work we cannot do alone. But boy, in the United States, we think we can. Now, this is a stage where we learn self-critical thinking. And we begin to reflect on how we have contributed to the problems that we complain about. In doing couples counseling, it is a major risk to say that to someone. You know, my husband is such a blah, 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 and my question is, and how have you contributed to this? Ooh, they don't come back. Institutions have an incredibly difficult time being self-critical. Think about it. We had a wonderful opportunity at 9/11 to wonder, why do people hate us so much? And we didn't take it. We just hit back. Level 6 is I'm powerless. And this is where we learn that there's no behavior, there's no technique, there's no morality, there's no political ideology, there's no religious belief, there's no institution that can save us. And Rohr calls this God's waiting room. Level 7 is hard to label. But it is the label that people look at and say, oh my God, if I go there, I'm not going to have anything to hold on to. Yep. This is where you learn. And it can be terrifying that you don't hold. You are held. We don't control. And that's the space I'm calling between gravity and grace. Level 8 is where you see Jesus saying, I and the Father are one. And he spent his life trying to teach other people that that was true about them too. So at level 8, people travel these two paths simultaneously. They go further in and further out at the same time. And eventually they find like a tape that these are the same path. We go deeper into the mystery of who we are and end up discovering that that is going deeper into the mystery of God. Thomas Merton was the one who said, the self and God are identical. You could have heard a proverbial pin drop in the room when Jim Finley taught this very principle. And he stopped his lecture and he looked at the people in the crowd and he said, I'm not God, but I'm not other than God either. I'm not you, but I'm not other than you either. Now, some people didn't like that because they want a God out there and they want to be different. Level 9 is what I call the Popeye level. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the cartoon comic strip Popeye, who is famous for saying, I am what I am. I am what I am. Now, there are very few people at level 8 or 9. Don't worry, you're not one of them. I have been lucky to have met a few 8s in my life. I hope you have too. I think most of us in this room probably bounce back and forth between 4 and 6, somewhere on there. We may make it to 7 occasionally, but this is important. If we do not move at least to level 4 with a solid commitment to go further, we will never, ever understand the teachings of Jesus. Ever. And the reason I'm doing this material is because if you're stuck at 1, 2, or 3, you're not going to understand what's coming in the weeks ahead. Now, Forrest don't like these teachings, but they're open to them. And the goal of spiritual practice and religious ritual is to keep us moving along the way. As my teacher said, my goal is to knock you off the path you learn when you get back on. So we receive information and experience at the level where we are. And this is why people at levels 1, 2, and 3 see people above them as woke enemies they need to correct. And it's why people at levels 4 look at people at levels 1, 2, and 3 as idiots. And all of us look at people who are at 7 and 8 as fruitcakes. Christian nationalism is growing in this country because people have not done the personal work they need to do to move to a more mature place in life. Stuck in the first half of the developmental process, they become more and more frightened as time changes things. Frightened people frighten people. Frightened people become angry people. And it's much easier to be angry than it is to do the work of loving. One of my most beloved teachers, the one who said, I'm going to knock you off the path, said to me one day, knowledge is when you light a torch to find the way. Enlightenment is when you become a torch to show the way. I'd put the same thing this way. Knowledge is organized facts. Wisdom is organized life. So all of that is to introduce the most radical teaching Jesus ever gave. And I'll bet if I were to ask you what it is, I doubt you could come up with it. The most radical teaching Jesus ever gave was God makes the sun shine on the wicked and the good, sends the rain to the righteous and the unrighteous. That's it. Now, this is from a much longer narrative that we're going to be dealing with in the weeks ahead. But I want to read to you the way that Eugene Peterson renders this whole section, where this radical teaching occurs. Now, we're still, and will be for a while, in what is known in the Gospel of Matthew as the Sermon on the Mount. This is Peterson. This is what God does. He gives his best, the sun to warm, the rain to nourish, to everyone, regardless. The good and the bad, the nice and the nasty. If all you do is love the lovable, you expect a bonus? Anybody can do that. If you simply say hello to those who greet you, do you expect a medal? Any run-of-the-mill sinner does that. In a word, what I'm saying is, grow up. You're kingdom subjects now. You're kingdom subjects. Now live like it. Live out your God-created identity. Live generously and graciously toward others the way God lives towards you. Now, everybody in this room is familiar with these teachings, whether you know it or not, because we've inherited these teachings in our DNA and our culture. If you've ever heard or if you've ever used the phrase, go the second mile, turn the other cheek, give somebody the shirt off your back, that comes directly from this section in Matthew. And we're going to talk about those in 2 weeks. So I want to remind you, the earliest followers of Jesus didn't one day sit down and say, hey, let's write a book about this guy. There were sayings that circulated, and then as people came into the group, they needed to tell the story about who he was. And eventually a narrative got created, and eventually somebody put it together, and eventually editors edited it. And then we eventually get the books that we have in the New Testament. Not all that we could have. Since the middle of the 17th century, biblical scholars have had the ability to go back and discern what are likely more authentic sayings of Jesus than others. And these teachings, this one about the sun, the rain, turn the other cheek, go the second mile, forgive, these are all at the top of authenticity of Jesus' sayings. Now, why was this teaching so controversial? Well, for example, when the Jews went to worship at the temple or to the synagogue to hear the law and the prophets read and commented on, they would sing their hymns. And the hymns are what we call the Psalms. And they would sing about God. And they would sing about how God blessed those who love the Lord, and God was not so kind to those who didn't. The entirety of the book of Job is about how could God possibly rain such tragedy onto this really good man. But if you read the Hebrew scripture, God plays favorites. And somewhere around the 7th century, there was a strain of prophetic voices that came up in Judaism that said, no, this is not right. What really matters is how not how God treats people, but how God's people treat people. And here arose the teachings of justice and compassion and fairness and treatment of the dispossessed. And Jesus is in this tradition that arose. Now, of course, we very smart, educated, aware people are very far from this understanding, right? No, not in the least. I have seen more people give up on the religious and spiritual journey because of some unfairness they think life has given them than any other single thing. Or I have seen people adopt really quite psychotic beliefs because of unfairness that has been done to them. The flood swept through the hill country and killed all those campers last fall. And somebody actually said, this is in God's plan. This is in the DNA of every person in this room. It's in mine. I'm just assuming it's in yours. When something tragic happens to us, we wonder, why did this happen to me? I'm not a bad person. I didn't deserve this. About 20 years ago, Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote this book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, and I hated that title. Just hate that title. Now, I understand Kushner's anguish. His 3-year-old son had been diagnosed with an illness from which he would die. And Kushner was asking why, and he wrote this book, and this has been a bestseller ever since. The title is wrong. It shouldn't be why bad things happen to good people. It should be why bad things happen. Because there are no good people. There's just people. Being good does not exempt anybody from the nature of growing old, getting sick, and dying. Nobody. And further, we don't have any control over when any of this happens. When I was in seminary and we were studying these texts, a professor said, God makes the rain fall on the just and the unjust. However, the just get wetter because the unjust have stolen their umbrellas. And a fellow student imagined Job on his knees looking up to heaven after all the tragedy had come to him and crying out, God, why me? Why me? And God responding, I don't know, Job, there's just something about you that pisses me off. And so there is this book, Why God is Disappointed in You, with the finger of God going, boop. It's a fun book to read, by the way. There are some unavoidable givens in life. And they come to all of us. Sometimes many times over. Everything changes. Everything comes to an end. Things don't always go the way we want them to. Life is not fair. To have a life and be alive is to suffer. And in spite of how much people love you, they won't always be loving. If life was fair, the odds are, given the world population, we'd be in Ukraine or Gaza or Nigeria or in Venezuela, but we're not. And the reason that we know that people aren't always loving is because we aren't. But we expect it from others. So when we oppose life as it is, when we resist reality, life becomes an endless series of disappointments and sorrows. And every religion, spiritual tradition that I know of, and I'm not talking about nonsense like the prosperity gospel and Christian nationalism, every religious system that I know says that the real source of our problem is our fear of these things. our denial of these things, our resistance to these things. Even more, the wise and useful spiritual teachings lead us to realize that it is these things of life as it is and our acceptance of them that we can use to gain the courage, compassion, and wisdom to put the broken pieces back together. And that's one of the ways we fulfill our moral obligation to be happy. Now, I'll tell you something that's non-dual. I don't believe that there's a bigger than human being out there that's got a stick that stirs stuff up on the earth. I don't believe that. And I believe you're not here by accident. You can call it synchronicity. Ilya Delio called it divine entanglement. It's a bit of non-duality for you, so I'm inviting you to trust that. That's my invitation to you. That we trust the grace that got us here, and that we be open willingly and knowingly to occupy this space somewhere between gravity and grace, the things that hold things together, and the space where we don't hold anything, but we experience the being held. We'll be able to receive and know and understand Jesus and his teaching only as much as our hearts are illuminated and freed from the narrow prejudices that come from levels 1, 2, and 3. During his time, people despised Jesus. Some people did. They plotted to have him executed, and they succeeded. And there were others who gave their hearts to him, and in the process, that led to this. So, truly to know the wayless way requires moving to higher levels of understanding, and I'm coming to see that truly to know the wayless way means increasing in our own lives and living the quality of perception that Jesus had. It's not my notes, but it stands out so vividly to me in a talk I heard Jim Finley give, that if we entered a deep period of meditation and closed our eyes, when we opened them and we saw the world as Jesus saw it, what would we see? And Finley says we would see God, because Jesus saw God in everyone and everything. So, as we began today, we'll end with light. There's no religious tradition anywhere, anytime that doesn't refer to light. Jesus' followers put into his mouth the words, "I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have a great light." And then there's this line that we hear at Advent, "The light is shone in the darkness, and the darkness cannot put it out." Now I want to be clear. In his admonition to his followers that they should trust the light and not be afraid, Jesus is not saying, "Don't worry, I'll see to it that nothing unfair or cruel ever happens to you." He didn't say that. He never said that. He didn't get that. Now, if the most radical teaching that Jesus ever gave was the rain falls on the just and the unjust, then the most important teaching that Jesus ever gave or ever said about him, and I doubt you can guess this either, was he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. That is, as Peterson put it, he steeled himself for the journey ahead. That meant that he would face issues, that he would precipitate crises, that would lead to a bitter and glorious end. And in setting his face that way, he gave us the direction for the wayless way. And we can never be true to Jesus unless we're true at this point. We cannot withdraw from the real issues of our time. Because if we do, we withdraw from Jesus, from the way. Jesus was not protected from the consequences of that way. I'll quote Jim Finley again, and I've used him a lot. God protects us from nothing, even as God unexplainably sustains us in all things. And I think that whatever definition you use for being saved or being enlightened is dropping down into an intimate realization of this very truth. We live on and in the realization that we inevitably grow old, get sick, and die, if we're lucky. We can't hang on to anything or anyone. We live in that reality, but we don't walk in the darkness of that. Rather, we live in the light that transcends, permeates, and shines through that darkness. That's what it means to walk the wayless way. To be ever open to the light that shines and transcends and permeates our lives, even the broken pieces. Because, as it is said, it's the broken places where the light shines through. No, I don't live this all the time. That's another reason I have a daily practice. To be in a quiet place where, though I can't control it, I can give the least resistance to the light that wants to break through, that seeks to shine in our own lives in the midst of our current distress. It's also the reason community is so important. Our life, your life, is not defined by the breaks. Meaning is not lost because the way is uneven or difficult. What matters is that regardless of the breaks, we walk the way with love, integrity, and compassion for ourselves, for all who are and all who is. And that's it for today. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this: you carry precious cargo, so watch yourself, and I'll see you here next week. Take care.